Hi, it's Paul Antonelli here with another episode of the Ideal Business Podcast Framework. So today I'm going to, in one of the previous episodes, I highlighted and outlined the 10 criteria where you would be able to assess your own business in relation to how ideal it is for you. So there's 10 criteria that I identified, and if you look at that previous episode, you can go through that. What I'll do as part of the podcast framework is touch base on each one of those criteria in a bit more detail, sort of discuss each of them in a little bit more detail, and then talk about some of the tools that relate to that particular area. So the one that I'm going to discuss today is risk. It's one of the It's an interesting one because when you look at risk, risk is something that just goes with the landscape. If you're a business owner, it just comes with the territory. Having gone through some pretty tough spots in business, having been bankrupt before, having lost everything, I'm probably quite been through some pretty terrible risk scenarios. I mean, they definitely make you... They definitely make you stronger, but also provide a bit of an understanding of how to avoid doing some of those things or getting caught in those situations. So what I want to share with you is from my experiences, what I would consider some key risk areas and what you can do to actually lower or contain your risk. And so it's an important thing to consider about your own business. You know, when you're, I guess it varies at different stages of your business. If you're at the start point, there's not much risk. Once you've built up a multi-million-dollar enterprise, you've got more to lose, haven't you? And also you have a team that's dependent on you. You've built the brand up, so you need to start thinking a little bit more about how you can manage and mitigate risk moving forward as you expand. And probably a good way to think about risk is, what could go wrong? What's the worst case scenario? So this is really putting on the devil's advocate hat and going, what if it all went? What could go pear-shaped? What could go wrong? And then looking at these things, and it can be managed. There's certain things that can take place that are within your ability to control them, but as we know, with business, there's a range of things that are outside our control. It can relate to things like COVID-19 pandemics. It can relate to regulation, legislation change, all sorts of things. So let's discuss a little bit more the idea of risk. What I'll do is probably a good place to start is look at where do I believe the sources of risk? Where does risk come from? What introduces risk to your business? Okay, the first one is debt. The issues that I've had in relation to past businesses that have failed, it really related to having debt. As soon as you have any form of debt in the business that's either secured against the business or against private, real estate or your house, there's an element of risk associated with it. I don't know if you've ever done it. When you sign a business loan document or an overdraft facility, it's quite a detailed document. If you actually go through and have a bit of a read of what's in that document, you'd probably never sign it. It gives the banks or the lender a lot of power. And typically with debt, there's mechanisms or the ability for them to call on that debt and effectively take control of your business. I've actually had this happen in past businesses, and it's not a pleasant place to be. And so it is something that it's all fine, with debt. Debt is, I remember talking to an old Italian successful businessman, and I remember he was saying to me, debt is like wading across a river. He was saying wading across the river, if it's up to your knees, it's fine. You're not going to have any issues. Once it gets to around your waist, it's okay. You can still manage it. Getting above your waist, heading up to your chest level, now you're sort of moving into deeper water and the level of risk increases. So, if you consider that in relation to debt, you want to consider that level of debt and the potential downsides and the risk associated with it. So debt's a big thing. If you can use, ideally with debt, if you've got a good business with good cash flow, you don't cross-collateralize, which means you don't use your house as security for it or external assets. But there are potential downsides. But using debt, you need to have really good control over it, because you do, in the event that things go wrong or don't go quite as planned, you can lose control of your business very, very fast. Now, I'll give you an example. We had a development business, which involved a property development. And this was, we were doing work sort of all around the country. And typically we had very low loan to value ratios, which means that, we borrowed no more than 50% of the valuation of the property. But when the GFC came, this was in 2009, 2010, one of the impact of that was that valuations of properties dropped substantially. A lot of that was linked in the lack of ability of obtaining finance for development. And when that took place, we had certain caveats or certain levels of loan to value ratios that we had to maintain. And once it dropped, those valuations dropped, which was really outside our control, then we tripped these mechanisms which actually enabled the lending institutions, the banks, to demand full payment. And we're talking millions. This was a multi-million-dollar sort of operation that we had. So that's an example where, we had low levels of debt. We thought our gearing was quite sensible. We built a lot of value, but that's something like the GFC comes along and it really exposed us and put us into a lot of risk. So that's an example of one example of risk, debt. The other example, another source of risk is legal action. So if you've been in business long enough, you'll understand that legal action takes place. We're not. Some of the things to understand about legal actions is it doesn't necessarily mean you've done something wrong. People often believe that you only get sued if you've done something wrong. It's not actually the case. Really, anyone can sue anyone for anything, whether it's actually bona fide or valid or not. There's a process that takes place, and if someone sets out to sue you, you have to defend yourself. And so it's just the nature of the business, being in business and the legal system. And so anyone that you engage with, be it clients, can be suppliers, it can be staff, can actually engage in legal action from your perspective. And you might look at it and go, well, it doesn't really matter. They won't win. It's not really relevant. An interesting statistic with legal cases is that well over 90% of legal cases actually don't go to court. They end up in a settlement because the legal system is so complex and costly that it's so often for smaller claims, it's just not justified. So even, I've had that situation where I've had legal cases that have come up. They weren't really valid. It didn't pay. It wasn't viable for me to go through a defence process. It was easier for me to write out a smaller cheque to make it go away, which is frustrating and sort of trips some of your principles, but that's just the nature of it. So legal action is definitely an area of risk to keep in mind. The other area for risk is external forces. This is probably the most significant to consider because it's it's outside your control and you don't even know what it is. You can't really put things in place to control specific risk activity like that when you don't know what it is. So this can include competitors. They can introduce pricing stress on your business or actually, undertake an activity that really introduces risk to your business. Regulation is a big one. If legislation, we've seen this happen often. There's some legislation that's introduced, whether it's at different levels of government, that can actually turn your business around super quickly. And China's an example where just recently they we're introducing legislation which related to tutoring, online tutoring and education businesses, and wipe billions off the value of these companies almost overnight. So this is the regulation can have a major impact and can really come out of left field. Things like pandemics, we're only too familiar with that at the moment. When you consider, the COVID-19 that we're in, and then you've got things such as weather events, natural disasters, stock market crashes, war, just to name a few. There's a ton of them. So with this area, it's not really, you can't specifically, look, there are certain things you can do to manage specific type of risk events, but then it's really more how you've organised your business to contain the impact both on your business and in your personal life, rather than putting specific measures in place. So it's just comes with the landscape. Having been in business for almost 3 decades, it just comes with the landscape of business. If you're in business, you're moving, you're engaging, you've got clients, you've got suppliers, and things happen. Things do happen, and it's unrealistic to expect that they won't happen, because they will. It's always been the case, and it'll continue to be the case. And so history, if you just look back over history, you'll see, we had the GFC a few years ago, .com stuff that go on. We've got COVID now. Sometimes when there's war events that take place, stock market crash, all sorts of things. These things happen time and time again. That's the one thing that history tells us. So to have an ideal business, you want to have a really good level of control over your risk that lines up with what you would consider ideal for yourself. So that's just a bit of an overview on risk itself and how it's defined, and then what I'm going to talk about. What I wanted to do in this episode was just share a bit of an understanding, awareness around these different sources of potential risk in a business. And what I'll do, I'll talk in the next episode, I'll talk a little bit about what mechanisms that you can put into place to manage, control and mitigate the impact on yourself personally and that of your business in relation to risk. All right, thanks for listening. Stay well and ciao for now.